The Dean J. Television Show. Hosted by Dean Robinson. And now, Dean Robinson.
What does the Trump effect have to do with Kroger's permanent position announcement?
USA Today says supermarket giant Kroger said Monday it plans to hire 10,000 permanent employees across its different chains as it continues to expand. The Street says the company currently employs 443,000 associates at its supermarkets, multi-department stores, jewelry stores, and convenience stores located across 35 states and in the District of Columbia, Kroger said. Kroger, the largest supermarket chain in the United States, announced that it is looking to fill 10,000 permanent positions across its 2,796 food stores.
According to NBC4, the permanent positions will be in Kroger's supermarket divisions.
The Associated Press, by way of WKYT-TV, says the company says it created 20,000 new jobs in 2014 and 9,000 new jobs in 2015. NBC4 says the company also announced that its total active workforce grew by more than 12,000 associates in 2016. Reuters says the number of permanent jobs being filled this year, however, is lower than last year's hiring and represents about 2% of Kroger's total workforce. Supermarket operator Kroger Company said on Monday it would fill 10,000 positions this year, joining a list of companies that have publicized routine hiring plans as President Donald Trump puts pressure on companies to employ more U.S. workers. USA Today says Kroger's move is the latest in a series of announcements from large corporations aimed at playing up their hiring in the United States. Several automakers have shifted focus to expansion of plants in the U.S. and hiring waves to go with them as they seek to deflect tweets from President Trump about previously announced expansion plans in Mexico.
The truth is that the Trump effect is not the unholy spirit. The Kroger Company permanent position announcement is an annual event expected by commercial media networks.
Back in May 2016, the Associated Press says Kroger is holding a nationwide hiring event to fill 14,000 open jobs across all its supermarket chains, including Ralph's, Fred Meyer, and Food for Less. The company says the jobs are permanent. Many of the openings are for part-time associates who bag groceries, stock shelves, or ring up items at the cash register. In 2015, the Huffington Post reports two of the most common positions in the company, cashiers and grocery clerks, each are paid an average wage of less than $10 an hour. The lowest paying job at Kroger is that of a courtesy clerk, earning an average hourly wage of $8.04. Kroger reported nearly $108.5 billion in revenue in its fiscal 2015, a 9.3% increase from the previous year. While the lowest paying jobs at Kroger are hovering just above the national minimum wage of $7.25 per hour, Chief Executive Officer Rodney McMullen's compensation has climbed in each of the last 3 years. In 2016, the United Food and Commercial Workers Union says Rodney McMullen, the CEO of Kroger, was rewarded a 17% raise by the company's board of directors. His total compensation jumped from $9.2 million to a staggering $11.2 million.
For a staggering $11.2 million, Rodney McMullen's CEO job at Kroger Company is a permanent position worth working.
Democrat and Republican politicians alike love investing public money into private multinational corporations. That's why Democrat U.S. President Barack Obama and Republican former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels spent $200 million to eventually help a Russian lumber baron score a sweet deal on a failed clean energy company with U.S. military contracts. In 2009, Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels returned to China with a group that included Charles Gassenheimer, CEO of battery maker Ener One Inc., who met with Wangjiang Group Corporation executive Liu Guangzhou. What resulted from that meeting was a game-changing joint venture for New York-based Ener1, whose principal subsidiary is Enerdell, the Indianapolis-based maker of lithium-ion batteries. No single individual has been more important to us than Governor Mitch Daniels, our advocate-in-chief in Washington and on missions abroad, said Ener1 CEO Charles Gassenheimer at a 2010 event to announce the joint venture with the Chinese auto parts company. In January 2011, battery maker Ener1 Inc. of New York and Wangjiang Group of Hangzhou, a city in the East China province of Zhejiang, agreed to form a battery joint venture in China. Besides being one of China's largest producers of universal joints, bearings, and CV joints, Wangjiang also produces electric vehicle batteries and entire electric vehicles. Under the deal, Ener1 will own 40% of a partnership that expects to make 40,000 battery packs a year by 2014. The packs will be manufactured at a 553,000 square foot plant that Wangjiang is providing in the southeastern Chinese city. In 2009, Ener1 Inc. takes the lead among a group of investors that plans to inject $47 million of equity funding into Think Global AS, the Norwegian electric vehicle producer. Ener1 Inc. is the parent company of Enerdell, a leading manufacturer of advanced lithium-ion automotive battery systems based in Indianapolis and an existing supplier to Think Global. Think Global, whose many previous owners included Ford Motor Company after funding ran dry in 1999, was again suffering from a cash crunch in summer of 2009 after going begging in December 2008 for up to $29 million in loan guarantees from Norway's government, which was denied. Think ceased production, but in January 2009, Ener1 had provided the bulk of a $5.69 million bridge loan to keep Think out of bankruptcy, although not enough to reinstate its manufacturing activities. In August 2009, Ener1 announced it would purchase $18 million in common stock from Think Holdings, the Norwegian LLC owner of Think Global. By the end of September 2009, Ener1 reported to the Securities and Exchange Commission that it had purchased $7.4 million worth of stock. The deal gave Ener1 a 31% stake in Think. Ener1 owns Think Global, the electric car maker. Ener1 owns Enerdell, the battery supplier to Think Global. Back home again in Indiana, state and local economic development incentives for Enerdell are valued at $69.9 million, which comprises a state incentive package of $21.3 million and Hancock County package valued at $48.6 million. The Hancock County Council approves a roughly $30 million tax break for Enerdell's facility in Mount Comfort, Indiana. The Hancock County facility opened in 2010 to great fanfare, even prompting a visit from Vice President Joe Biden. Enerdell has also applied for an additional $9 million from federal government development programs. A Russian bank lends Ener1 up to $100 million, accepting 40% of the company's stock as collateral. Enerdell tapped the country's top scientist at Argonne National Lab in Illinois, and U.S. taxpayers pledged up to $118 million in federal stimulus funds and $80 million in state and local incentives to help Ener1 produce cutting-edge battery technology for electric cars and the U.S. military. With unemployment peaking above 20%, Elkhart, Indiana was at the white-hot center of the economic meltdown and a natural launch point for President Obama's electric vehicle initiative. So that's why I'm here today, the president said in 2009, to announce $2.4 billion in highly competitive grants. Republican Governor Mitch Daniels was also on board in convincing Norwegian company Think Global to open a plant in Elkhart to build Think City electric cars with a sticker price of about $42,000. As incentive, the federal government offered Think City $17 million in stimulus tax credits. Oslo-based Think Global, a Norwegian electric car company whose primary model is a two-seater called the Think City, was to produce its glorified electric scooters at a revamped recreational vehicle plant in Elkhart, Indiana, a plan that was also endorsed and supported by Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels. Think's economic development goals were closely linked to those of Indianapolis-based Enerdell, which was to produce lithium-ion batteries for the Think City. Ener1, the parent company of an electric car battery maker that was awarded a $118 million grant from the Energy Department in 2009 as part of President Obama's economic stimulus package and green energy push, filed for bankruptcy protection in January 2012. The filing came exactly a year after Vice President Joe Biden visited an Ener1 manufacturing plant in Indiana, where he proclaimed the company was the start to reshaping the way Americans drive and the way Americans power their lives. Alex Sorokin, the CEO for lithium-ion battery manufacturer Ener1, said the company suffered when demand for batteries dropped as fewer Americans than expected opted for electric cars. In retrospect, it may be that a 10-year-old design for a plastic-bodied two-seat electric minicar was not what the U.S. market wanted, especially at a list price of $35,495, higher than that of a brand new 2011 Nissan Leaf, which had twice as many seats, twice as many doors, a longer range, and a known brand name. The cars are being liquidated following the bankruptcy of Think Global and the shutdown of Think's U.S. assembly plant located in a former RV plant in Elkhart, Indiana. A New York federal judge signed off on a $4.2 million settlement between Ener1 Inc. and a consolidated class of shareholders suing the lithium-ion battery manufacturer over its failed investment in Norwegian electric car maker Think Global. The shareholder class had alleged that Ener1 failed to disclose that Think Global's sales were falling short of expectations and that the company was accumulating large amounts of unsold inventory, key factors contributing to a $73 million write-down in 2011, according to the complaint. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission announced that it has settled with 3 former executives at electric car battery manufacturer Ener1 Inc. and a PricewaterhouseCoopers LLP accountant regarding the company's overstatement of revenues. The agency primarily attributed the violations to failures by Ener1's management, specifically former CEO and Chairman Charles L. Gassenheimer. The SEC ordered Gassenheimer to pay a $100,000 civil money penalty. After a series of financial blows, Enerdell recently consolidated its greenfield plant with one in Indianapolis, leaving the facility in the Mount Comfort Business Park absent of any activity. Enerdell CEO Michael Canada tells the county council the company is no longer operating out of the Mount Comfort facility. The Hancock County Council moves to terminate Enerdell's tax break. Democrat President Barack Obama and Republican former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels dedicate $200 million to bankrupt battery maker Ener1 and bankrupt electric vehicle maker Think Global. Dozens of Republican lawmakers, including one-time vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan, asked for hundreds of millions of dollars in grants and loan guarantees under the Recovery Act for clean energy projects in their districts. But that was before it became a political strategy to exploit the failure of innovative companies in order to win an election, says Climate Progress. Unlike bankrupt Solyndra, the advanced solar panel maker that became a lightning rod for critics of Obama's stimulus spending when it closed its factory and liquidated, Ener1 promised its business will proceed as usual. This is the Aftermath, a premium luxury sedan born from the ashes of the Fisker Karma, a Tesla rival that wowed the automotive world before collapsing into bankruptcy 3 years ago, will soon begin rolling off a production line at California's newest car factory. Karma Automotive joins Tesla on a list of locally based car and bus manufacturers, including Faraday Future, BYD, and Ativa, that together are making California ground zero for the electric vehicle market. Like those companies, Karma is backed by Chinese money. The bankrupt Karma's assets were purchased in 2014 by Wangxiang Group, a Chinese auto parts giant that also owns A123, the battery company that produced power packs for the Fisker cars. The sale of A123 Systems, which was awarded a $249 million federal grant and tens of millions in tax credits from Michigan, has been the subject of intense political debate, with military leaders and politicians arguing that U.S.-funded technology should not be transferred to a foreign company. At the auction held in Chicago, Johnson Controls Inc. of Milwaukee and NEC Corp. Of Japan teamed up in an unsuccessful effort to top the bid of Wangjiang Group Corp., a Chinese auto parts maker whose North American headquarters is in Elgin, Illinois, said Charles Gassenheimer, president of Carnegie Hudson Resources Capital, a New York private equity firm and strategic advisor to Wangjiang. The Wangjiang purchase of A123 marks the second major foreign purchase of a U.S. battery company backed by Department of Energy funding. Gassenheimer, for instance, previously was chief executive of Ener1, a battery maker with operations in Indiana that was snapped up in another bankruptcy by Boris Zingarevich. Think Global now has a new owner, Russian lumber baron Boris Zingarevich, who was also the majority shareholder in Ener1, which had a stake in Think. A little more than a year after Biden's visit to Ener1's Indiana manufacturing plant, the company's technology is owned outright by Boris Zingarevich, a Russian businessman with ties to Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, a fact that concerns some technology experts in the U.S. Zingarevich acquired Ener1 out of bankruptcy March 30th, 2012, with an agreement to infuse $81 million in financing, giving him a sophisticated line of batteries that can power electric cars, store electricity for power grids, and supply portable power for soldiers. In the case of Ener1, neither the Department of Energy nor the Navy checked on foreign ownership before awarding the company grants and research and development contracts. The Army, which also awarded contracts, said individual employees underwent routine background checks as contractors, but scrutinizing the company's ownership structure was not part of its purview. Purdue University hosted a Midwest Forum in June 2016 that will help guide the U.S. Department of Energy's Regional Clean Energy Innovation Partnerships. The program is part of Mission Innovation, a global effort established last year when 20 countries, including the U.S., committed to doubling their funding for clean energy over the next 5 years. The $110 million proposed plan is highlighted in President Barack Obama's energy budget for fiscal year 2017, which calls for $7.7 billion in discretionary funding for clean energy research and development. The program is right up Indiana's alley, according to Lieutenant Governor Eric Holcomb, who spoke at the forum. "We're overly interested in these private-public partnerships," he said. "We are doing everything we can think of to speed the delivery to the world, to society, to the marketplace of any new technologies that rise on this campus through any of the myriad collaborations that we have," Purdue President Mitch Daniels said. Democrat and Republican politicians alike love investing public money into private multinational corporations. That's why Democrat U.S. President Barack Obama and Republican former Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels spent $200 million to eventually help Russian lumber baron Boris Zingarevich score a sweet deal on a failed clean energy company with U.S. military contracts. Ener1 calls it business as usual. With car sales in a free fall from the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression, General Motors was losing billions and running out of cash. By the time the company closed its books on 2008, it would be in the red by a staggering $30.9 billion. Chief Executive Rick Wagner led the auto delegation in Washington seeking government funding to save the industry and keep GM out of bankruptcy. The U.S. government spent about $50 billion to bail out GM. As a result of the company's 2009 bankruptcy, the government's investment was converted to a 61% equity stake in the Detroit-based automaker, plus preferred shares and a loan. The remainder of GM's equity stake was divided between the Canada and Ontario governments, the United Auto Workers Retiree Trust, and bondholders and other creditors. Vicki Denton died after the airbag in her 1998 Dodge Caravan minivan failed to deploy during a head-on collision. In 2009, a jury found Chrysler responsible for her death because of a manufacturing defect, awarding her surviving son and other relatives $2.2 million. The family was near collecting those damages on the eve of Chrysler's government-brokered bankruptcy. 2 years removed from a $12.5 billion bailout, Chrysler Group LLC still hasn't paid the damages and doesn't have to. The reason? The company's restructuring allowed it to wash away legal responsibility for car accident victims who had won damages or had pending lawsuits before its bankruptcy filing. The same holds true for General Motors Company, which discarded the liabilities as part of its own $50 billion bailout and restructuring. In the 2009 deal overseen by the Obama administration's Auto Task Force, Fiat, the 115-year-old Italian auto company, paid no money to acquire its initial 20% stake in Chrysler, only contributing some of its intellectual property instead. Fiat would later pay $2.2 billion to raise its stake in the company to 58.5%. Fiat paid $3.65 billion to purchase the final 41.5% of equity interest in the Chrysler Group that had been held by the United Auto Workers Retiree Medical Benefits Trust. The Ann Arbor, Michigan-based Center for Automotive Research estimated that the U.S. would have had 2.6 million fewer jobs in 2009 and 1.5 million fewer jobs in 2010 if General Motors and Chrysler had disappeared. The study also estimated the government saved or avoided the loss of $105 billion in lost taxes and social service expenses. U.S. taxpayers likely lost $1.3 billion in the government bailout of Chrysler, the Treasury Department announced. Originally, the government committed a total of $12.5 billion to the struggling automaker Old Chrysler and the company's newly formed Chrysler Group. Of those funds, $11.2 billion have been returned through principal repayments, interest, and canceled commitments, the Treasury said. A 2014 report on the auto rescue done by the Auditor General of Canada said the Canadian and Ontario governments contributed $13.7 billion to the GM and Chrysler bailouts. Canadian taxpayers will fall about $3.5 billion short of breaking even on the money the federal and Ontario governments invested in the bailouts of Chrysler Group LLC and General Motors Company in 2009. The U.S. government lost $11.2 billion on its bailout of General Motors Company, more than the $10.3 billion the Treasury Department estimated when it sold its remaining GM shares in December 2013, according to a government report. In Fort Wayne, Indiana, a $5 million grant for General Motors is now a reality. The Fort Wayne City Council unanimously approved a measure awarding the grant to the auto manufacturer, which is in the process of performing a $1.2 billion upgrade to its Allen County truck assembly plant. The $5 million grant is essentially pass-through funding from the Indiana Economic Development Corporation, City Controller Pat Roller told the council. That means funding from the state will allow the city to provide the grant award to General Motors. A new deal with the United Auto Workers allows GM to hire new workers at considerably lower wages than older ones earn, which ought to reduce labor costs over time. Plus, GM's operation in China is a roaring success. At the North American International Auto Show in Detroit, General Motors officially unveiled the American version of the 2016 Buick Envision, a China China-made compact SUV that is key to boosting sales. General Motors is planning to import the 2016 Buick Envision from China to sell in North America this year. The move will mark the first time one of the Detroit Three has imported a vehicle from China. Today's announcement by General Motors that they are importing the Envision from China is a slap in the face to U.S. taxpayers and the men and women who worked so hard to save GM during its darkest time. UAW President Dennis Williams and Vice President Cindy Estrada, who head the GM department for the union, said in a joint statement. Buick spokesman Stuart Fole said GM is importing the crossover from Yantai, China, because it makes the most business sense for the company. Federal regulation of passenger automobiles is by far the most extensive case of government influence on a consumer product. There is no close second. Specific regulations cover almost every aspect of the vehicle, including design, production, and operation. When the departments and agencies of the United States of America own automobile producers while regulating the automotive industry, the government practices communism, no matter how temporary the experience. An alien, maybe not Homo sapien. How do you know it's true? The sheriff done told the news. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien. How do you know it's true? The sheriff done made the news. Sheriff Joe Arpaio hates everything from Mexico. All light brown people have to go, 'cause Sheriff Joe done told you so. Illegal people, can't you see? Your mere existence is killing me. All taco eaters have to leave, 'cause Sheriff Joe is showing teeth. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien. How do you know it's true? The sheriff done told the news. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien. How do you know it's true? The sheriff done made the news. Sex crime happens, no big deal. Call Sheriff Joe and get the heel. The only thing this man can feel is a pain he really never wants to heal. The British say this land is mine, 'cause Washington and friends are fine. Killed native tribes all down the line, enslaving black people and all their kind. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien. How do you know it's true? The sheriff done told the news. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien. How do you know it's true? The sheriff done made the news. Joe says Obama comes from afar. The brother may as well have come from Mars. So he's eating cars, he's eating bars. Barack Obama from the planet Mars or Africa is just as bad. If he was from Great Britain, we'd all be glad. But as it is, we're all just mad. By Sheriff Joe, we've all been had. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien. How do you know it's true? The sheriff done told the news. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien. How do you know it's true? The sheriff done made the news. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien. The president's an alien, maybe not Homo sapien.